All right, yeah. I will be opening the block about EEZ, so I will now give you an overview, an introduction. We will have Jordi next, who will specifically look into the real-time proving aspect of EEZ, and then we will have Philip talking about the transition of Gnosis chain into EEZ, and finally concludes this whole section with a panel with Friederike and Vitalik about EEZ. So maybe going, looking back at how over the years our Gnosis perspective on L2s and sidechains and so on evolved. So, well, as you all know, we are in the space for quite a while. So things on mainnet, but of course then gas costs exploded, and it was clear for we had to look elsewhere. And XDAI was one of the early back then sidechains, so we started to deploy our products in parallel on XDAI and Ethereum mainnet. Then we, in 2021, we in a way took over XDAI and turned it into Gnosis chain, and there already the question was then looming: should it be an L2? Should we turn it into an L2? And we first went a different route. We followed Ethereum, and we also did the merge and have our own beacon chain, because we were quite critical of the L2 roadmap and the way L2s function at the time. So I gave a talk about the limits of L2 and how they are broken, and why why we don't see that valuable essentially for Gnosis. In 2024, I gave a talk at Dappcon, talking about native L2s. So trying already to lay out how, in a way, good L2s would look like, and that finally now evolved into what we now call EEZ. So now with EEZ, we have a framework where we think, well, that's how L2s should be, and consequently, this is also now finally the decision to turn Gnosis then into an L2 under this EEZ framework. So let's again look at the problem for a second. So we are on Gnosis chain, and already a couple of applications were mentioned. So we have the Gnosis wallet or the Gnosis app with things like EURO-E and Gnosis Pay. So we need EURO-E liquidity, and we have the Circles Trust Graph, and we have a savings token like SDAI. And now, ideally, and that was how Ethereum used to be. Is that there are all those components, those small protocols, and you can permissionlessly, or you have all those Lego pieces, and then you can build them together as you like. And it all works, it's beautiful, and with every Lego piece that gets added, you can build more beautiful things. But this is not how it works today. So today, those Lego pieces are fragmented on the different chains. So just a few examples. We have, for example, Polygon, and there is, Polymarket is on Polygon with the conditional token framework. And just a random example, it would be quite nice to say, okay, I want to have a position on this conditional token framework, so on a prediction market. But instead of how Polygon uses it right now, instead of using USDC as collateral, we would like to use SDAI as collateral because that's interest earning. But it doesn't really work because SDAI is on Gnosis and a conditional token framework is on, or that specific instance is on Polygon, and it just is quite complicated to go back and forth. Another example is in Gnosis app, we would like to support better privacy, and there are of course privacy protocols out there. For example, privacy pools. but it's deployed on Arbitrum. So kind of going back and forth to Arbitrum is again difficult. Another example, on Celo, there is this self protocol, pretty cool protocol where you can take your passport and kind of scan it with your phone and make proofs that in your passport, whatever, you have a specific nationality or you have a specific age, and that would be quite nice to combine this with the Circles Trust Graph. But again, it's such a pain to do it because they are not on the same chain. Last example, your liquidity wouldn't be nice to kind of share this liquidity and have overall then stronger euro liquidity against Ether and dollar stablecoin. But again, it's fragmented. So there's some liquidity here, some liquidity here, some liquidity on Ethereum, and it's all a mess. Again, why is it a mess? Because ultimately those layer 2s or those other chains have essentially very slow communication with Ethereum. And that is kind of the seven-day settlement. For Arbitrum, it essentially takes 7 days to Ethereum. So if you would want to go the proper path of using the canonical bridges, it would take you to kind of go back and forth from Gnosis, or I mean to just implement the things I just described. The communication between the chains would take many days, and it's completely impossible to build an app. So you would need to fall back on third-party bridges, but then again, you have a fragmentation. They might only support a subset of those things. So it's overall a total mess, and Ethereum, therefore, and I think that's a big reason why Ethereum is in the position it is in, where it's, where it's certainly not been as successful in adoption of protocols and of dApps. It's certainly not as successful as we would have wished it to be. And I very much blame this level of fragmentation to it. So what is, where's EEZ going towards to? So EEZ will essentially be a set of chains that are much more tighter connected to Ethereum that essentially do what we call real-time settlement. And real-time in terms of Ethereum means every 12 seconds, because every 12 seconds there is a new Ethereum block. So if you settle your chain every 12 seconds, you are essentially kind of in real time with Ethereum. And now things change dramatically. Now essentially all those chains that choose to kind of join this economic zone, they can do instant transactions back and forth. And kind of technical term would be they have synchronous composability. So in the first step, those are two chains. Well, Gnosis will move into this EEZ, and we are building a project that we call Rollup 1, kind of the first proof of concept, or more than a proof of concept, but kind of the first instantiation of EEZ chain. So those are the very first chains that will join this EEZ. But of course, the potential hope is, or the path should be that any chain that wants to join, that essentially those network effects can join the EEZ, and then it overall becomes this much stronger place where innovation can happen again, and just more positive network effects happen. So again, today it's quite complicated to launch a new chain. If you launch your new chain, there's still so many pieces you first need to get on the chain to make it attractive for developers to build on this chain, because you need different stable coins, you need different on-ramps, you need price oracles, there's a long list of things that are basically, before you even can start building interesting stuff. And in this new EEZ world, you could launch a new chain that is EEZ-enabled, and by default, you already have everything available, all the tokens, all the protocols that are available on Ethereum. You by default can already plug into them, and you can really add to it instead of first rebuilding what was already done. So first, you benefit from the network effects, but then in the next step, you also contribute to the network effects. So again, right now, even if a chain overcomes this hurdle and then becomes successful, then it becomes successful on its own, and it's essentially still its own ecosystem and its own cosmos, and it's not really contributing to this overall thing. Again, this would change with the EEZ. So one more perspective on this. So the promise was made quite often. So I think I'm certainly not the first one telling you, okay, this is how we fix interoperability. So there have been many attempts to say, yeah, we are doing shared sequencing and we are doing this zone where we will have this interoperability. I think the big difference is that, we put Ethereum at the center. So if you build a new protocol that says, okay, within this protocol, you will have shared sequencing and you will have the synchronous composability and so on, then of course that is only useful if many projects join that zone. So if you're the first one, then, well, congrats, you have synchronous composability with yourself, and then, well, okay, maybe you can convince someone else to join, but then you're still a small subset. This is, again, different with EEZ, because the first chain that already joins EEZ will have this synchronous composability with Ethereum, and that's immediately already a huge value add. So it basically doesn't have this bootstrapping problem of first requiring enough chains to join before it's useful. EEZ is useful from the very beginning because Ethereum is part of it. A bit technical slide. So, there are many concepts, and I just wanted to quickly say, so there is the idea of based rollups. So essentially rollups where they don't have their own sequencing, and there is the concept of native rollups that I introduced at Dappcon. So essentially a rollup that doesn't have its own token, that basically just is as neutral as possible and kind of is basically just an extension of Ethereum. And then there is EEZ, which essentially means you have this real-time settlement on this synchronous composability. And you can combine all of those things, and that is what Rollup 1 does, but you can also still, and this is what Gnosis is going to do, you can also still have a sequencer which means faster block times and other things. So one more question I sometimes get is, should we even have L2s anymore? Aren't we in a place that L1 is scaling, and that basically just everything should live on L1? And I would say there are 4 arguments why we should still have L2s. And number one is simply still costs. So those are the costs I took from today. So a swap on Ethereum costs, plus minus 15 cents, borrowing the same. And those are base costs of $10 or something like that for a swap on Ethereum. So 15 cents is great, but there are still many, many use cases that require significantly lower fees. So our Gnosis Pay card, where you do you can buy your coffee for $2 or $5 and potentially even a swap, because you might want to swap your interest earning tokens then into the token you pay with. So basically, such a transaction cannot, for this specific use case, can certainly not cost 1 cent. Definitely needs to be below 1 cent, and 15 cents is completely impossible to build that. So that alone means many use cases are not feasible on Ethereum L1 just because of costs. The second is, of course, speed. Ethereum has 12-second block times, and again, for many use cases, you want to have faster speed than 12 seconds. The next one is still, number 3 is still what I would call distribution. So we saw this concept that many, let's say, centralized exchanges want to have their own L2, and I think it kind of makes sense. So they can basically, in a way, it's one way to think of it is to say it's a franchise model. So they can kind of take what Ethereum essentially build and have their own version, and in that they can have their own, try to use their existing distribution channels to get a user base on it, and they can take a cut essentially from the fees, or they can have other business models. But it still, and again this changes with EEZ, it still feeds back in heavily into Ethereum. And because as soon as you do then transactions with Ethereum back and forth, yeah, well, you strengthen Ethereum, and again, it strengthens the network effects. And the argument number 4 for L2s is neutrality, or in a way the opposite of neutrality, being opinionated. So I think Ethereum, and I think we all agree about that, Ethereum should be the place that is yeah, absolutely neutral. But being neutral comes with a cost. And I mean, the obvious one is in the case of hacks. So if there are hacks, and unfortunately there are still way too many hacks, it comes with a big cost of being neutral. So basically saying, no, we are not hard forking, we are not censoring, we are basically letting the attacker go away with, the hacker going away with, with stealing money essentially, is a big cost, and or is a big trade-off. And again, I think it's correct that Ethereum, stands here for this, or is this anchor piece of credible neutrality, even at the cost of essentially letting hackers get away with hacks. But I think there's definitely room for L2s to have different opinions, and to say, for example, on our L2, and so what I'm suggesting for Gnosis, to say, well, we are opinionated in this case, and we say if there's a large hack, we are, in a way, we are not neutral, and we are trying to then have processes in place to revert that, if in any way possible. So now let's look a little bit in the technicals. The next talks from Jordi and Philip will go more into it, but just to give you an intuition of rough intuition of how it technically works. There are two major components that are required to become essentially an EEZ chain, and the first meant to your state. So you cannot basically, as Ethereum, you basically need to, within the time span of 12 seconds of a new Ethereum block, you need to commit to Ethereum what your new state is going to be. And you also need to kind of commit in such a way that you cannot go back from it. So if you want to do this in a trustless way, then you need something like ZK proofs. So you basically make a proof that this is your new state, and you also prove that it's correct, but you can of course also use methods that assume some level of trust. So it's sufficient if whatever, with TEs or with even a multisig, as long as there's a firm commitment, this is our new state, and you have this commitment fast enough, that's kind of the real-time component of it. That's the component number 1 you need. The component number 2 you need to accept that Ethereum is the ultimate source of truth. And that means if you made this commitment on Ethereum, then it's binding. And usually Ethereum goes only forward. So basically you make this commitment, then it is what it is. And then kind of in the next block you make a new commitment. But once in a while it happens that Ethereum reorgs. So once in a while it happens that you commit something to Ethereum, and then Ethereum kind of forgets about this block. So this happens roughly 3 times a day that an Ethereum block was created, but then a new Ethereum on top of this one, but it's instead building on the previous one, what we call a reorg. And that happens roughly just 3 times a day. If it happens, you need to kind of accept that, or your layer 2 needs to accept that. So you committed already to the state, but this was forgotten. So potentially you need to reorg as well, and you need to, essentially you need to follow the reorgs of Ethereum. And generally speaking, that's quite doable, but it is something to keep in mind. So again, 3 slides now technically works. So let's say we have Ethereum block 100, block 101 and then 102, and those are anticipated blocks at this time. So we are here in time, we see this block, and we anticipate that those blocks are coming, and essentially, thanks to the beacon chain, 12 seconds in the future. So essentially, we have to do a bit of time traveling. So we are here in our L2, and we basically already here, so let's say 6 seconds before this block actually happens on Ethereum, 6 seconds before, we have to already peek into the future and say, okay, we are doing a block here, and it will have transactions that in a way only happen in 6 seconds in the future, and they will happen in this Ethereum block, and we need to anticipate already what they do. So again, we have here, for example, a user trying to make a trade on Ethereum, so starting on the layer 2, sending some tokens to Ethereum, doing a trade, and getting some other tokens back. Then we need to anticipate, or in 6 seconds, and already kind of continue our chain with the anticipated result. And kind of then essentially commit to this, and then see if that transaction, that settlement transaction of essentially the settlement of our L2 state actually works the way we anticipated it. And if it does, great, then we are in this state. So things can get complicated here, but so just roughly an overview. So of course, it might be that that this doesn't happen because we don't, or from the L2 perspective, you're not fully controlling Ethereum. So you might say, okay, I want this transaction to be in the next Ethereum block, and I expect it to have this result, but things can change. Someone might get a transaction before you in, and then your transaction does not have the expected result. So there are tricks you can do to essentially kind of test or deploy or try to execute multiple versions in parallel and basically say here's a settlement, but if that doesn't work, then I can use this one, and if that doesn't work, then I can use this one. So you can then basically say, okay, there are a bunch of transactions that are unaffected regardless of this, and I can always confirm them. There are some transactions that depend on whether they get into Ethereum. The whole thing gets then complicated once you have multiple EEZ chains and you have those blocks that sync with Ethereum, and you might have some blocks in between, and you might have, but too much for this talk. But just as a kind of in depth, things are of course a bit more complicated. But okay, so. Last 2 slides, I believe. So number 1 is just, again, step back. Who or what is required to make EEZ happen? And the good answer here is no one. So we can do it right now. We don't need any hard forks. We don't need any buy-in from someone. We can just permissionlessly build it, and we will build it. Of course, there are a few entities, and specifically builders and validators, who ultimately control the settlement of Ethereum blocks, that if they work together with EEZ, it can make the whole thing I kind of tried to describe in the previous slides easier, because it becomes more predictable that your L2 chain can actually do the settlement it expects to do. So one last one is, I already hinted at it. Yes, Gnosis will become an EEZ chain, but in parallel we are doing what we call rollup 1, and just a few comparisons. So we will rollup 1 will be fully based, so just using Ethereum timestamps or block time 12 seconds. We'll have Ether as gas token, but on Gnosis we will keep extra. I use 2 seconds block time. So finally, very last slide. Very rough timeline. We hope that by the end of the year we have Gnosis with limited EEZ functionality, so with the ability to do synchronous calls, but yeah, not. I mean, you can do very complicated synchronous calls that go back and forth, and maybe we'll start with calls that only go in one direction or only have one return value. We will still try to bring concrete, tangible advantages to Gnosis earlier, and in parallel, we are developing this rollup 1, or started as a testnet on Ethereum, and it can as rollup 0, and it can turn over time into a rollup 1. So bottom line is, in summer, hopefully we have something that's already live on Ethereum. By the end of the year, we have already functionality to Gnosis for Gnosis chain. Okay, that was my overview or introduction to EEZ. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am afraid I'm short of time. Or one
you can take questions.
Okay.
You can take
well,
questions.
Then I'll happy to answer questions. I think I see. Or, okay, maybe we start.
Great talk. How come everything is solved and there's not something coming up which breaks the whole thing?
Pretty confident, because yeah, we have in a way created proof of concepts end to end. So we have tried everything I described here. So yes, it boils down then to what level of reliability can we get to. But here I would say the whole Ethereum block production process has already shown that you can go to a high level of reliability despite all this complexity. So if you just look at what the complex flow is of building an Ethereum block right now with relayers and bundles and bundle merging and builders and I mean there's a whole it's a really complicated process, and it works extremely reliable. So I would say those two things to me are proof that we can do it.
We have time for maybe one more, if we're quick.
I think there's
Just here.
someone get you a mic. No. Okay.
What is the general and such?
Yeah. Right. So the question is, do we need to lobby people to join? So the good thing is, I think that in a way we want people to join, but we also don't care that much, because essentially as soon as Gnosis joins, we already get a huge advantage for Gnosis because we are fully compatible with Ethereum. And if others want to have this advantage as well, then they should join. So we don't need others to join to get an advantage out of it. That's point number one. But then maybe still kind of thinking about when does it make sense to join. And then I would say, yeah, I admit kind of for large ones, and that's maybe right now it's probably Base and Arbitrum are probably the chains that have sufficiently created their own ecosystems. For them, it's maybe slightly less interesting, or at least because they are in a way already strong enough. But for all other chains that struggle with having enough liquidity, having enough stuff, for them it will be a big benefit to say, okay, finally I don't need to spend all this money on trying to create incentives for liquidity, on paying then essentially use Ethereum. So long story short term, I would say it's most interesting for chains that haven't reached escape velocity, but definitely I would say long term it should be interesting for everyone to kind of benefit from the network effects.